Welcome to another edition of Hacker Heroes, a segment where we explore the stories behind the hackers in our community. Joe Grant, also known by his hacker pseudonym Kingpin, stands as a prominent figure in the hardware hacking scene. With an extensive background in hardware, reverse engineering, and embedded systems, Joe has carved a niche for himself as a respected authority in the field. Stay tuned. Joe Grant, coming up next. This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network. From the Security Weekly Vault, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things being sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly.
Joe Grant, welcome to Hacker Heroes.
Thanks for having me.
Also known as Kingpin. We'll talk about the origins of that name as well. But it's good to see you. Good to have you on the show, man.
Yeah. It's been a while. Nice to see you somewhat in person, and thanks for having me on the show. It's exciting. I'm caffeinated as always for podcasts. I got my Club Mate.
Club
ready
Mate.
To go.
Wow.
Yeah, you're drink of choice.
You're caffeinating in style.
I am. This is the cola version, so I'm almost like a spokesperson by this point. I
haven't had that in a long time. Like,
so good.
Made me someone brought a case of it. It was delicious.
Yeah. That's it. And I pretty much anytime I need like some good caffeine, because it's not over the top, like it's not like 5-hour energy or something. So yeah, it's good. But I'm ready. Thanks for having me.
Now I have this site that I don't like to mention what site it is because I'm afraid that someone will take it down or whatever, but it's a hacker database, and I have your entry up. So It says your in real life name is Joseph Brand. I think we got that. Hacker handles Kingpin. Yeah. And it says you're a member of the Loft. I think we can confirm that. Now, under rumors, it says it's co-hosting an upcoming engineering show for the Discovery Channel.
I don't know what site this is. That is old. That's from 2007 when I was filming Prototype This, which I was a co-host of, which was 4 engineers building ridiculous prototypes of projects, which is why I moved to San Francisco at the time to film that show. And it was me and Zaz, who is another hacker, Defcon enthusiast, who has done a lot of robotics, human-robot interaction, and software stuff. And it turns out we had all these similar friends that we'd known through Defcon, but had never met until the production company was like, you guys are working together. And it's like, oh, so, we hit it off right away. And we had a guy named Terry, who is a amazing machinist out of LA. So he does a lot of like crazy mechatronic stuff for movies. And Mike North was from UC Santa Barbara. He did a lot of the material science stuff. And we joked that he did all of the work that none of us wanted to do. And I was the hardware guy. Yes, that was old, but it is available on DVD sets for relatively cheaply on eBay, and probably on the Pirate Bay. We did 1 season of 13 episodes, which was amazing. I mean, it was a lot of fun to kind of show that engineering process of things, over the top, ridiculous projects. But they didn't renew it because it was just too expensive to make. Which was a bummer. It was like right before like the maker space, hacker space thing was happening. Maker Faire was just starting to come up, so it was a little early in the production company didn't really know like what to do with the stuff once we made it. And we really could have gone around the country, like to schools, and showed this stuff off, and it would have been amazing. But it's just, the TV world is a different world, and it's an antiquated world now.
Right. Because people just have their own, you get your own YouTube channel and you could do that show.
Well, exactly. Right. And that's what I've started to do more, because then you have complete creative control over everything. But yeah, I mean, it was a great experience, but someone needs to update that page. That's for sure.
That's how it's. Well, let's go back to how you got your start. Like I have these images of you like skateboarding around Boston and coming across these crazy hackers and like, hey, just like let me in and teach me something. Was it kind of how you got your start? Did you grew up in Boston?
Yeah, I grew up in Boston. I mean, that's partially true. Like I grew up skateboarding, and just general mischief causing. but I've always been involved in computers. So even before I started skating, I got my first computer when I was 7. And
Me too. What computer did you get when you were 7?
an Atari 400.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, 6502. People say crappy keyboard, but I love that membrane keyboard is how I learned to type. And downloaded games from bulletin board systems and got some sort of hex editor and taught myself what hex was when I was 7 or 8 by just changing stuff in the hex editor and changing the crack screens from someone else's name to, my name, which wasn't Kingpin at the time. It was Black Ninja when I first started. And yeah, just through bulletin board systems, kind of there was one called the Boston Computer Society. So that was like normal computer users, if you could call them normal back in the 80s. It was kind of, you had to love computers. And a lot of people were on that. And then I can't remember how I sort of found the hacker. It was more pirate BBSs, and then it turned into some of the hacker stuff. And eventually, a bunch of us in the Boston area hacker scene just started getting together. And then that ultimately turned into the Loft. And then I ended up joining the Loft a little bit later on once I had gotten in trouble and got some of the teenage.
Yeah, you were like a little mischievous, right? In teenage years?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I tell people, if if I wasn't causing trouble on the computer, I would be causing trouble on the streets and just like harassing tourists and train driver, anybody really. I was just a kind of a kid out to let roam free, and that was my way of, I guess, communicating with the world or something.
Did you get
I was
trouble?
never malicious.
Yeah. Did you get in trouble with the law or just general mischief?
Yeah, no, got in trouble with the law. So I should say I wasn't malicious in the way, if you think about hackers now, of erasing databases or stealing, stuff that's going to damage somebody. It was always normalized for me as I'm connecting to a system or a credit bureau that, maybe I shouldn't be accessing, but I have this power that I'm using to explore things, but I'm not hurting anybody. If I steal credit cards, it's a giant faceless bank corporation. The individual who I steal a credit card from is not going to get in trouble. They will be reimbursed. So I always kind of saw it as just, little explorer going up against the man. And I would, connect to lots of different systems. And I was part of a hacker group called Renegade Legion back in the day, pre-Loft. And we have a bunch of text files out you can find on textfiles.com. And, typical hacker stuff, credit card fraud, how to connect to credit bureaus, how to hack, blah, blah, blah. And that just sort of turned into somebody had this idea of hey, let's all of us from Renegade Legion, let's go meet at Dr. Death's house in Michigan. And we were from all over the country, kids. And my parents were like, sure, that sounds like a great idea. Because I'd already been to
Wait,
PBS.
Did you say, hey, Mom and Dad, I'm going to visit Dr. Death in Michigan?
Yeah. But, by that point, I was 15. So it had already been 8 years of hackers. And, people would call the house and they would know to ask for Kingpin or earlier handles because that's all I did. So it really wasn't that abnormal because I'd been to bulletin board meetups. They weren't called meetups. It was we'd all bring our box of floppy disks and we'd trade games in person, local to the Boston area. So I had already been doing that and my parents had been bringing me to those things. So they just thought, okay, why not? It's a bunch of high school kids and a couple older kids. But that I ended up getting arrested for physically breaking into a telephone company parking area to steal equipment from phone trucks, which was a huge passion of mine of the telephone system. We hear about this with old people like us. Exploring the telephone system was this network that was completely wide open, kind of like now the internet, right? But it was the phone system and the massive AT&T conglomerate. And there's so many things you could do on that phone network. So I just really loved exploring that system and figured, hey, if I can get access to some of the equipment that the linemen have, maybe there's documentation, maybe there's other tools I can use to spy on people and whatever. So yeah, we decided to do that and all got in trouble. I was the only one underage. All the other guys were older than me, and got in serious trouble and some jail time for most of them. I was super lucky, ridiculously lucky, where they didn't end up pressing charges. because I was a juvenile, and it came down to the fact that like the cops didn't want to fill out a whole other set of paperwork for me.
Oh my God. Yeah. Talk about lucky, right?
They called my parents, they called the local police to talk about me. And I came home and there was like a cruiser kind of stationed outside my house for a while. So that was a big turning point. Definitely, I got a lot of that out of the system after that.
So, but is that what made you go find like a new hacking group? Basically, your other one got arrested. You got in some trouble.
Yeah, we started. So that hacker group kind of fizzled away after that. Some of the other guys in the group that I was hanging out with locally in Boston, they ended up getting arrested also for some credit card fraud and went to like some sort of like military boot camp. So that kind of old hacker scene had kind of fallen apart. But the rest of the Boston hacker scene was very strong. And I had already been in touch with a lot of the guys that would end up forming the Loft. We would meet together. There was a local bulletin board system called ATDT, and we had these ATDT meetups called Grillathons, which still happen to this day. And the first one I think was 1991 was the first Grillathon. So I had known these guys before I got in trouble.
Is that the way they were grilling like on a rooftop, or was that more?
Yeah, that was the first one. Actually, yeah. So in Joe Men's Cult of the Dead Cow book, there's a description of the first ATDT Grillathon on the roof, and they say like I was throwing either cookies or rocks off the roof at people, and
I've heard that.
It's true.
I've heard that story. So that story is true. You were throwing stuff off the roof.
I was throwing stuff off the roof. I'm pretty sure, like, I'm not an assoul. Like, I'm pretty sure.
I know you're not an asshole. I met you before. You came on the show previously, and everyone talks wonderfully about you.
Thank you. I don't think it was rocks. I don't think I would have thrown rocks at people.
I think it was like fruit. Someone said it was fruit. I won't say it was.
I don't think it was fruit. I think it was, or maybe it was. I think it was cookies, but I have thrown fruit at police from the roof of buildings in New York City.
Yes.
So it's possible that it was fruit. But yeah, so that was how I met these guys. And it was just, Boston had a great hacker scene with all the universities around. So after I got arrested, let's see, was the Loft may have already been in an infancy just around then, with Count Zero and White Knight and GoGo 13 and Brian Oblivion, who had started the Loft. But it wasn't as structured as it ended up being. And I think, after I got in trouble, they're just like, all right, Joey got that out of his system. Let's let him hang out more. So it was really their decision.
And they kind of took you, I think it was Space Rogue maybe described this they took you under their wing to keep you on the straight and narrow and keep you out of trouble. Yeah.
100%. I mean, I always see them as these sort of older mentors, but in reality, they're, 6 years older than me, which was significant at the time. I mean, they totally took me under their wing and guided me at such a formative time, right? It was like 15 years old, seeing how to properly handle yourself, right? And how to share information and how to do all of these things to use your skills, your hacker skills in a good way. Like it really was, I was kind of absorbing them. What's it like, when you're a parent, modeling, that's what it is, right? When you're a parent, you kind of do things and your kids model that. That's what I was doing. Like I was modeling how Count Zero interacted at conferences and how he was so good at getting people excited about things he was doing and what we were doing as a group. And Space Rogue, it was one of those guys that him specifically was a huge inspiration and hugely important because he would drive me to and from the Loft a lot of times.
Yeah, I was still had to skateboard like uphill both ways to the Loft. I mean, it wasn't short distance from what I.
And it was sketchy too. Like the first Loft was in the south end of Boston, which at the time was not really a place where little kids would go by themselves. And it was quite a trek from the Green Line, Copley Square. There was an Orange Line station, but I usually never rode that because that went to even other scarier places as a kid. It was a long skateboard ride there. I did start riding my bike when I was a little bit older, but Space Rogue would, drive me through the bad neighborhoods to get back home. And I just really had like an affinity. All of them, I loved all of them, but like Space Rogue and Tan and Brian Oblivion, and Count Zero in those early days, like just hugely important to have those sort of people to learn from. Right. And like, I was still, even after I got in trouble, like I was still a punk. Like it's not like I all of a sudden was like, I love the world. It was still, I was still a teenager, and I still didn't fit in school and stuff. So like the loft was really a place where I could go and be accepted. And I still, to this day, like nobody's actually answered like why me, right? Like why Kingpin out of the rest of the people in the Boston hacker scene, why was I allowed to become a member of the loft very early, right? In 1992, like why? And nobody's ever been able to give a straight answer for that, because I know when I was 20 something, I wouldn't have intentionally hung out with like some younger kid. So I don't know. But it was amazing. I mean, the best experience that of those years for sure was the loft. The only experience of those years was the loft.
Joe, I think some of the best mentors see something in you that you don't see yourself and kind of guide you towards that. And that kind of sounds like how they were mentoring.
I think maybe they saw something, or we just hit it off. It's really hard to find people that you actually get along with. So maybe they had already had enough experience of that, knowing like, okay, this, we kind of jive together. I do remember in high school, like, so after I got arrested and I joined the loft, my parents said I either had to do a sport or get a job to keep me busy. And I was like, no way, I'm not working. Like, that's crazy. Actually, I think I got like a dog walking job. And the first time I went over, the dog bit me.
That's not, I was sorry to laugh, guys. I had to sock, but just the way you said it struck me funny.
It was, yes, that was my work experience. So I started running track just because like I had a couple friends on the team, and I was short and chubby. Like I wasn't in shape or anything, but that was a good balance, the running side. But we would me and some of my friends who were not great runners, but still on the team, like we would run to CompUSA, which is like,
I remember CompUSA, man. Here in the Northeast, that was the computer store. Yeah.
Yeah. You're in New England too. I mean, that was it. So we would run to CompUSA, play video games, and Brian Oblivion worked at that CompUSA, and Space Rogue actually did too. So we would run there after school. I'd wave to them. They'd be in like this fishbowl where they repair the computers, and play games, wave to them, and like run back. So it was just a fun time. And like the loft was just at that time too, like we didn't have any ulterior motive. Like it really was just this hacker hangout space. We would go there after work, or for me after school. My parents would pay the rent. They knew that after I got arrested, they knew that I was going to still do technology and use computers. And they were like, all right, let's at least get them into a, it's like, it's almost like the Boys and Girls Club sort of thing, right? It's like, and he knew that I was surrounded by good people.
Now, wait, did your parents meet the rest of the loft crew?
Oh yeah. I think they had met them even before then at some point, but my parents would always be out and about. Maybe they met them one by one, but they knew them.
Yeah, they should let you hang out with a bunch of creepy computer nerd strangers, right?
Yeah, but again, like by that point, they were used to it, right? Because like I would go to these other things. But yeah, I think they'd met Count Zero at one time. We used to go to flea markets all the time. So Count Zero and Space Rogue and Brian Oblivion, probably separately, but they knew all those guys.
When you say flea markets, though, I don't think all of our listeners really know the MIT flea market and its significance. It's been around for a long time. It's not like you say flea market and people are like, what? Like that's kind of where you go about like cheesy stuff. Like, no, the MIT flea market is where you got the cool hardware, right?
Yeah. So there was the MIT flea market that was sort of the meeting spot for everybody. Every month from April to October was like this spot. Everybody would go, who was, into the hacker scene or into electronics or whatever, at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, like an amazing kind of meetup spot. But even, we can talk about that in a second, but even before then or during that time, there was other electronics flea markets, like ham radio flea markets all over New England, in New Hampshire and Western Massachusetts, and even down into Maryland we would go. So we would drive they would drive and I would be a passenger, down to these other flea markets, because we just all loved gathering crap and bringing it back to the loft and doing stuff with it, which I still do to this day. If I find a surplus store somewhere where I'm traveling, like I'm there. So it was more, it was like we weren't just sitting there using computers all the time. Like there was really the social aspect to it. But the MIT flea market is how a lot of a lot of us would see each other, monthly, and of course being in the loft, but a lot of other people in the hacker scene, that's how we would all see each other, right? And like in the early days, even at the old loft, after the MIT flea market is when we would have like our kind of hangout, and people would bring all the stuff they bought back to the loft, and it was like an open house sort of thing, and everybody would hang around and get food and look at all the crap they had, and it was really just a social kind of gathering. But that flea market, I love it, and I think it's still going on. And I was selling stuff there separate for a while, and then at the loft we would be selling as much as we could, as often as we could, because that money that we were making would pay for the rent.
Right, that was a source of income. So you'd buy stuff at the flea market, fix it up, and then turn around and resell it, right?
Well, yeah, and we'd go trashing, dumpster diving all over New England anyway to get computer equipment, fix that stuff up. We would use a lot of it also at the loft, and it was just such an awesome thing. We would take turns manning the booth, and like we had this wad of cash that we called the wad, and it was like, who has the wad? Because sometimes like we'd peel off 20 and go buy something that we needed for the loft. Like it was really fun. And, there was a lot of characters there. We ended up, I think that's maybe where we met Lady Ada, Limor Freed, who started Adafruit. I think we either met her there, or she was on some of the early bulletin board systems. Window Snyder, maybe that's when we met Window. I think she bought like an old Linux box from us. But we were all kids, and they were even younger, right? So it was just an awesome meetup spot. And it's something that it's sort of a lost kind of art, right? Like you don't see a lot of places like that anymore, because so much of the electronics nowadays, you can try to repair them, but it's not like it used to be, where you could get a parking lot full of people selling stuff.
Right. Yeah, we go to Amazon or Adafruit and buy it.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean, it was such a great time. And, looking back at it, I realized how special all of that time was, but being in it, I didn't know any better. Like that was just the life that I had been on. And it was,
were you
amazing.
doing hardware hacking like back then? Or like,
yeah, so I'd always been into electronics. Even before I got involved in the loft. I mean, when I was 8, between 8 and 10 is when I made my first circuit board. My brother was also into electronics, and he's actually how I got turned on to the computer in the first place. And he's 6 years older than me, but he would repair, stereo equipment and stuff like that. So he ended up having like this kind of cabinet of just random circuit boards and stuff. And if I did favors at home, like clean his room or whatever, he'd let me pick a circuit board out of the box. So that's what kind of turned me on to that. And I would just go to our local electronics store, not Radio Shack. It was You Do It Electronics, which is still there, and buy electronics magazines and build projects out of those magazines. And then like sometimes modify those to do other things. But really it was just like learning electronics through reading the schematics in those magazines and building the projects. And it would always be stuff like the stun gun or the, the high frequency sound generator to annoy people, like all the fun stuff. And that's what I learned. Yeah, there wasn't a TV Be Gone back then, at least in the magazine. But yeah, I of course built one of those and used that a lot also. But yeah, so always been into electronics, and computers was kind of just happening in parallel to that. So when I started hacking, and really it started more at the loft because I had access to more equipment, and Brian Oblivion in particular is an engineer. So I could kind of look up and see what he was doing too. But that's really when I started, analyzing. I was cloning a lot of cell phones back in the day and selling cloned cell phones before the loft. But I was still into cell phones when I joined the loft. So I spent a lot of time reverse engineering old phones. And then we started building our own projects and stuff at the loft. Some of them we would end up selling. So one of the first things we sold also to fund our rent and things was this POCSAG pager decoder to decode POCSAG pager transmissions, which now you can do with like, a $5 software-defined radio and some software.
Yeah, I think Larry did that. He had a project where he had a Raspberry Pi? You're right. It was the software-defined radio. Yeah.
Yeah, software. Yeah, you could. It's super easy now. But back then, what you had to do basically, you had your like radio receiver, your scanner radio or whatever, and you would feed in your audio from that into this. This was essentially like just an op-amp circuit that would kind of threshold the data, so ones and zeros, and feed that into I think it was the parallel port, and then there was some software on there that would decode it. But we made these kits, So yeah, I've always been interested in like the hardware electronics side of everything. Like when I was growing up and even at the loft, because hacking wasn't a career, like you couldn't do that as a job. My path was to become a professional electronics engineer, which is what I did. So during the loft, after I graduated college, I went to Boston University. So I stayed in town. That was the thing, is when I graduated high school, the loft was still going strong. I graduated in 93, so it was still very early actually in the loft. And I didn't want to leave. Like it was such a huge, that's how important it was in my life, where I said, I'm not leaving Boston to go anywhere else for college. So it was either Northeastern University or Boston University. And I a lot of schools. Yeah. Yeah. And so I went to, but I didn't go out of state, right? There was other colleges that I thought would be good from an engineering perspective that I didn't go because it was purely because of the law. So went to Boston University, got my computer engineering degree, started working at a product development company, which is a company that a family friend of ours had started back in the 80s. And my brother had worked there, and I had done some like internship work, just, going in for free after school to help out doing IT stuff, and went there to interview for an engineering position because there was one engineer who was retiring, and then another guy came in who was sort of like a very experienced engineer, but they kind of needed not a lab technician, but an entry-level engineer. So I interviewed, and the door was open where we were interviewing, and like the CEO of the company walked by, it was actually co-owned by two people, the family friend and then another person I knew from working there a little bit. And he said, "Hire Joe."
There you go. Came down from above.
Right. And that one was funny because even before then, there was a project that I had helped with, an electronics project for a huge company. It was a major deal, but like they got some circuitry back and it wasn't working. And I came in and they're like, "It's not working." And I just did some kind of a reverse engineering and analysis of it, figured out what the problem was, and fixed it. And I didn't know like how big of a project it was or anything. Like that was just, I came in after school, and one of the owners had given me like an envelope full of cash as like a thank you. And I'm like, this is awesome. So that was sort of legend by the time I was there for the interview. They're like, "Yeah, remember that project?" And which also involved actually the cleaning crew had vacuumed up a piece of the electronics.
Oh no.
So we had to dig through the trash to do that, which was perfect. So that's like what I always
you had
done,
experience.
Right? So
you're like, wait, I have a lot of experience digging through trash.
Yeah, it's like, let me just jump in there. So I'd been working at this company, and I, was designing electronic products for companies, medical devices mostly, and got a lot of production experience as well. So going to the factory, and here I was by that point, like a 20-year-old kid learning the ropes of production manufacturing, which again, I had this mentor at this company that just sort of let me go to the factory, but then he would come back, I'd go back and kind of give him an update. He would teach me and explain what needed to be done for like, "Oh, we got to update the test procedure now, or we got to do this and that." It was fun to be kind of the representative of that project from our side, from the company. So I'd always been into that. And again, like security, like hacking it was a hobby, right? Like it was fun to do. Like there was no way you could have a career hacking or teaching about hacking or doing anything related to that. Like it just didn't happen. And then one day we decided like, hey, let's do the loft full time. Like by that point, a lot of those guys were finding advisories and vulnerabilities and making more of a name as like for the loft as a security research thing, and hacking was becoming cooler. So we all took that plunge and left our jobs. And probably I would still be at that company if the loft hadn't decided to go full time and ultimately turn into at stake and all of that stuff.
Right.
Like,
so they drew you back into security, working full time for the loft. Your primary source of income was at Loftcrack at that point.
Yeah, I think Loftcrack was making a lot of it. T-shirts, we were selling T-shirts still. We had some CDs, the Black Crawling Systems Archive, Space Rogue's Whack Mac Archive, a couple other things, the Poxide pager decoder still. But yeah, I think by that point, it was Loftcrack, and I think Mudge was doing some consulting also, and some of that money was coming back in. So it was good. And I think really when we all decided to go full time wasn't until we already had the deal kind of prepped and ready for At Stake. Because I do remember, like, we had done some other work in the past for some other companies, as kind of feeling each other out of like, we want to work with these people, and we had not quit our jobs yet. So it wasn't like we all quit without a plan. Like, we were thinking we could bootstrap the loft and do it and try to do consulting that way. But then we decided, like, hey, we ended up finding, the VCs that were starting At Stake, and it's like, let's get in and do that all together, because then at least we have some job security, and we knew that we could quit our jobs and still try something new. And from my perspective, like, I think Weld had kids by that point. Brian Oblivion maybe had some young kids. So they really had responsibilities where I didn't, I was like, whatever. I didn't realize that it would ultimately, like, kind of ruin the thing that we had built and a lot of the kind of relationships we had as money got involved and business got involved. And I didn't realize that it really was like this end of an era.
Yeah, because there was a lot of friction about that from certain members, right? The whole At Stake thing.
Yeah, I mean, it seemed like a good idea at the time. I think that's probably the best way to say it. And at that point, like, who wouldn't want to hack on stuff and get paid for it? Like, it just seemed like we had done the loft for so long, and we tried to spread this message of the good hackers. What can good hackers do? And we'd done the Senate testimony and all of this stuff. And it was like a couple of years after that, right? So it had been boiling for a while.
You were on the Senate testimony? Is that correct?
Correct.
How old were you when you testified before Congress?
Well, it was 1998. So I was 22, I think. Yeah. And that was my first public speaking experience also.
Yeah.
Yeah. But another time where I didn't realize the significance of it.
You just were all piling in the van with Wi-Fi antennas hanging out, driving down. Yeah. You're like, let me talk to Congress.
Going on a road trip. It's like, oh, mom and dad, I'm going to go testify. Like, I don't even think they realized. Like, if my kid either of my kids were going to testify, I would be like, hell yeah, let's go. Like, I would be in the audience. Like, it just wasn't, to me, it didn't seem like a big thing, other than the fact that there was like cameras everywhere and there's all these old people in suits. But like, I didn't really pay attention to any political stuff, government stuff. Like, none of it mattered to me. But the fact that we as hackers got to go and like show off, like, yeah, we're the loft. Like, that's really what it was for me. Of like, I was very proud to be involved in that group with those people. So it was like, yeah, let's go represent the loft. Like, let's go do it. We've done it with the media.
And you can go, let's go do it again. You can still watch that, right? That's somewhere on the internet, is it?
Oh yeah. So I posted it on YouTube. So if you probably just search Loft Senate testimony, but if you go to my YouTube channel, which is just Joe Grand, I think my official YouTube name is Kingpin Empire. But nowadays it's like, if you just search Joe Grand, you'll see it. And it's there, the whole thing, like however many hours. And you can see it. You can even order the written testimony also. Like, it's in a book that you can get. Yeah. So it has our names, and we're the first people to testify in front of the Senate using fake names that weren't in the witness protection program. It was kind of cool. So in the United States public record, it's like Kingpin, Space Rogue, Mudge. And the senators too. There's a great quote of like, I can't remember who it was. It was either John Glenn or Senator Lieberman, or maybe it was Fred Thompson, of like, I can't wait to go home and my kids ask who I met with today, and I say Kingpin and Space Rogue, which was really fun. So yeah, I mean, that was all a good experience. And then, At Stake happened, and we were able to be hackers full time, and other security companies started coming up around then. And then the industries just sort of started snowballing from there. And there's, a whole bunch of stories to go into, but it really that was kind of, to me, that was sort of the seed of what the industry is now. I think my first Defcon was Defcon 9, where we went with a bunch of us from the loft. I just remember being at some party with Dildog, and his shirt was off and he was hugging me. And I think it was either at the Alexis Park or whatever was even before then. It was not a nice hotel. But I don't remember going to any talks. I think it was mostly just hanging out. And then I didn't go back until Defcon 13. And then Defcon 14 is when I first started doing the badges, and then pretty much have gone every year since.
How did that come about? Like, how did I'm assuming it was Jeff select you to do the badges? Because that's like this is before badges were like a thing, right? Like, I think
badges
were not. They were electronic badges. We got badges, and they were just like, whatever.
They're just badges. So Defcon had already been known for like interesting badges, right? So by that point, they'd done like some laser cut ones and some liquid filled ones and some other things, because Ping, who was doing those, was just very artistic and creative in that stuff. But no other conferences were doing anything nearly like that at all. So by that point, Defcon 14, I think was 2000, maybe it was 2006 or something like that. But I had been... Yeah, so it would have been, right, so 3 years earlier, 2006. So the Dark Tangent, Jeff Moss, was still running Black Hat at the time. And in 2005, he's like, hey, Joe, like, I'm starting to do trainings at Black Hat. You should do an electronics training, like a hardware hacking training, which nobody had done anything like that before. And I was like, why would anybody care about hardware hacking? So what ended up happening is I created this course curriculum for Black Hat training. And as part of that course curriculum, I made this little G-shaped circuit board, which I don't have any here. They're all in another building. It was like a little microchip PIC-based, microcontroller with some external memory and a bunch of other stuff to use as the device to do all of the hacking exercises during my class. And it was in the shape of my logo, which I also don't have. I'm a horrible marketing person. It's a G with an exclamation point in it. And that was the shape of the board. So I did the training. And after like one or two trainings of Black Hats somewhere, Jeff was like, hey, we should do something like that board for Defcon as the badge. And that's all it was. Like, he was just saying it because he's, super creative also. And he sees this. What? Yeah. Yeah. And he sees this big picture, right? Because he loves this community, and he really does. Like, we've known each other as kind of kids, like teenagers. We'd met at some conferences before that. And even just the hardware, the training thing, right? Like, all the conferences doing trainings now, and companies with training budgets. And that is mostly my career, being able to train professionally. Is like, who thought that I would be able to make money talking? And so that was just amazing. But then the badge thing, it was a total, just like in passing, like, hey, let's try to do it. And I was like, sure, let's go ahead. Like, nope, we don't know what anybody's going to expect. There was no pressure, because we could do whatever we wanted, and no one was going to really complain because they didn't know what they were.
Hardware hacking course and stuff we worked on. This is a microcontroller, so I just want technical clarification. The code runs directly on the chip. Like, there's no kernel, there's no operating system, correct? You're basically running code to run directly on the chip.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the design. Like, you can have microcontrollers with, that are very complex, that have operating systems and things. But this particular board is what's called bare metal. So it's just code running on the device. And I do have external memory, not for firmware storage, but for data storage that's used as part of the course, because we do some memory extraction and modification and things like that, some bus snipping and things. But yeah, so basically it's just a think about it now like it's a PIC, but think about, any sort of like ARM Cortex M0 or, low end ARM device. Usually microcontrollers are going to have onboard memory, usually, onboard flash, but possibly double EEPROM as well. And then peripherals, everything in one, as opposed to like your microprocessor, your CPU on like a router. A lot of times you have your CPU and then you have your external memory and your other stuff, and that's running Linux and way more complicated. It's hackable.
I'm trying to defy these because as part of my job, I'm realizing that we all have microcontrollers built into our computers, like several of them. One of them for like baseband management controls or BMCs are all I'm like, whoa, wait, there's like a whole little computer in there that's actually
yeah, especially when you're doing BIOS. Yeah, I mean, everything now is like multiple microcontrollers and everything. And really the trend nowadays is like throw a microcontroller in it, right? It's almost like the Portlandia episode, like put a bird on it, like put a microcontroller
one of the
on
things
it.
I started looking at, like, it told me my laptop's EC firmware was out of date. And I'm like, what is that? I'm like, okay, it's embedded control, but what is oh, it controls the
Right.
function keys that control your screen brightness, the power button, right, the battery, and it's firmware running inside of your computer that's controlling that particular set of peripherals.
Thing. You know what's even scarier is I can't remember when this became more of a thing. Was it Spectre or something else where it's like there are actually, multiple kind of CPUs inside of your CPU. So it's not just different things, different external pieces, but it's like there's extra stuff running in your chips. There's a smaller computer that runs the boot ROM or the microcode that's then doing something. So all these little bits end up being exploitable. Not always, but it's like gives you more of that, whatever you call it, threat landscape. I mean, it's just,
I think that's why
microcontroller.
But I think that's why your early working course, Joe, is significant now, right? Because it's not always like I'm messing around with this little controller. Now these controllers are in everything.
Right, that's right. So it really is like, the reason I did and continue to this day to use my G circuit in my basic class is it kind of hits on all the fundamentals without making people overwhelmed with a real product. But all of these things are still applicable to modern products, and there are so many modern products to go for.
So based on your background, you knew how to build a board with chips on it and peripherals, and so you did that for your class. So you basically designed and printed. I mean, probably printed yourself. Everybody else was that board, right? But you designed your own circuit board that you could program, essentially.
Yeah. So by that point, but when I started doing the hardware hacking training, I'd already built a bunch of other production manufactured circuit boards of my own, because I was in like 2000. So I left At Stake in 2000, end of 2002, and started my company, which is
I was going to say,
I still
so At
am
Stake
now,
is when you started your own Grand Idea Studio, right? Is the name of your company. Yeah,
that's right. And the intent of that company was to get out of security. I was like, I'm done with the hacker scene, I'm done with security. I want to get back to pure engineering. So the concept of that company was to do product development and come up with ideas, build prototypes, and license those to other companies to manufacture. So by the time my hardware hacking training happened, which was a couple of years later, I'd already been manufacturing products and licensing those and building prototypes. And Parallax is a company that I got heavily involved with. They sell a lot of hobbyist robotics, and very early in that world, they were selling some of my stuff. So the G circuit was just another thing to build, which is why when we went to make, I think at that time it was 6,000 Defcon badges. That was Defcon 14. Yeah. So that was just a kind of natural progression of things. And doing the Defcon badge was basically my re-entry into the hacker world. Like I mentioned Defcon 9 that I went to, and then Defcon 13, because I'd actually written a hardware hacking book a long time ago. That is a good collectible item, but it's a little out of date. Some of it's still, the appendix stuff is still relevant as far as tools and things. But yeah, it was the Defcon badge that kind of brought me back into the community. And it was Jeff again, right? Like he's the one who brought me back again in 2000 for Defcon 27, and for Defcon China, because he's a cool guy and so hard to say no to. It was like, yeah, sounds awesome, let's do it. And then it's like, shit, this is really
so hard. So the first batch, when you printed up 6,000 of them, how did that go over? What did it look like? I don't remember now.
Oh yeah, so I wish I had it. That's in the another room too. So that first one was basically like a Defcon logo shaped round circuit board. I had two big jumbo blue LEDs on there, and a single 3-volt coin cell, and a tiny, like a SOT 23 6-pin PIC 10F microcontroller. So really tiny. Just wrote a bunch of code, and I'm pretty sure it may have even been in assembly language, where you press the button and different LED blinky modes come up. Like that's all it was. And I figured, well, everybody likes blinky lights. Let's do something simple that has like low power that's going to last a long time, and went through the proper engineering process for it. And then made I think maybe it was 6,700 of them or something, but that was not difficult, because I just worked with my circuit board fab and said, hey, we want to make these. And they came back with recommendations of like, all right, we need to have fiducial markers so we can make sure we're, placing the parts right, so the yield is right. but that was all just part of the engineering process. And then we gave the talk of like how we did the badge, and that was the start of electronic badges.
Did you have ones later that were wireless that interacted with each other? Was that a Defcon badge?
Well, yes and no. So I did some, and other people did other ones later on. So Defcon 14 was the blinky lights. Defcon 15 was the scrolling LED matrix with capacitive touch sensing buttons. So you could basically print, set messages to scroll on your badge, which I thought was pretty fun. Defcon 16 had infrared communication. So that was one that if you had an SD card in it, it would read the file contents from the SD card and then transmit that to other people. So you could basically do file trading with people. And then at the end of the day, you take your SD card out and be like, oh, I have like 5 files. Let's see what they are. But if you didn't have your SD card in there, then it would just be a TV be gone because it had the infrared LED on there. So that was a fun one. And then Defcon 17 was a microphone, which I felt a little bit weird about bringing a microphone to Defcon, but it was still it wasn't connected to anything of the outside world, but it was a tiny surface mount microphone with an RGB LED. And basically you could do like kind of a VU meter, pulse along with your microphone input. And the microcontroller we used was actually a digital signal controller. So it was like more of a signal processing chip. So a microcontroller version of a DSP where you could do a lot of interesting like signal processing and math and stuff. And so that one was very simple, but it had an I2C interface. I'm pretty sure it was I2C for badge to badge communication. And there were different badge shapes depending on like if you're a human or a goon or a speaker or whatever. So you could connect those together and they would blink LEDs in different ways. But if you got all of the badges together, you'd build a puzzle that was like a circle that would come together with the Uber badge in the middle. And you could wire all of those up and they would do like cool communication.
Yeah.
And
I think I was in the vendor area that year ironically, I was selling t-shirts, as you mentioned before. And people would come, like all my hacker friends come up and be like, hey, dude, can we borrow your badge? Because I was like, one of the vendors that they knew.
Yeah, because you were the vendors and that was a different shape. And getting an Uber was hard. Like I might have had Jeff and I think were the only 2 people who had Ubers, which were the black badges, for those days of Defcon, because they're not given out till the end, right? So we were the only 2. So if people got the rest of them together, then we would come over and like plug ours in so they could see it. And then Defcon 18 was an aluminum substrate badge that we laser engraved on the front side, different artwork. And that had a 0 power LCD, which now I guess we would know as like an e-paper LCD. And you could choose different icons to show what things you liked at Defcon. So there was like a soldering iron in a beer and dice if you like aiming and all these things. You could put those on there. So you wouldn't have to necessarily like create small talk with people. You could just look at their badge and be like, oh, you like hardware too? That's cool. And start talking. And then all of those, even starting at Defcon 14, we wanted to have this badge hacking contest. So that started with our first badge and just to see what people could do with it and try to get people involved in using the badge and involved in electronics. And that was really my goal, right? It wasn't like, let's just create this badge, but it was, if we're going to do this, it's kind of a development board in a way, an artistic development board, but it's like, let's bring electronics into Defcon because there wasn't a lot of hardware stuff going on.
I think it really influenced the community in that direction, Joe, and you accomplished your goal because since the Defcon badges became electronic, everyone started printing up their own badges. Like I remember subsequent Defcons, all of a sudden, anyone that had a party, anyone that had like a booth or a village, right? They'd be like, oh, like a cool thing to do. Even other conferences to like have an electronic badge.
Right.
And that was like, you started like this trend that I think it comes to goal, like it's people cool. In the hardware because like, wait, that's your badge too. How do I interface with that badge?
Yeah. Well, then, people could even make their own small runs or their own one-off ones to show off. And that was it. That really, like, when that started happening, and that's actually why I stopped doing the badges. So at Defcon 17, I felt like, okay, mission accomplished, right? Like, I'd done this for 5 years. There are amazing badges, amazing groups of people doing stuff that's happening at other conferences. And then from a personal perspective, it was like people were expecting me to do it. And given my mindset was like, well, if someone's going to expect me to do it, then I don't want to do it. I've always been like that. So it was like, let's let somebody else do it. Like, let's get Defcon to continually morph, right? Because it is always changing. And Jeff has always said, like, Defcon is what people make of it. And I'd felt like I'd kind of proved my point, and I wanted to do some other stuff. And it was like, all right, so I stopped doing it, kind of retired. But like you said, like just seeing all of the badges and things that people are creating. And I think also it used to be harder to get in touch with like circuit board manufacturing. Like you had to know somebody and have this personal interaction with companies to do that. And I don't know if it was because of the economic downturn in like 2008, 2009 real estate in US. Like, I don't know if that affected other things, but that's when it started getting easier. You know, circuit board fabricators started offering services online. So you didn't need to know somebody who knew somebody to get you in. You could do these kind of faceless manufacturing of boards. And I think that's when things really took off. And then mail order stuff too. Like it used to be DigiKey and Mouser, but then Adafruit was huge for prototyping. And a bunch of other hobbyist electronics companies, as the maker community started getting better and started getting bigger, you had all the resources to kind of build on. So it's just kind of this combination of things that I think made it more accessible for people to make their own stuff. And it's still to this day, like really satisfying and humbling to see it grow this far, but also like to see what people have done from an artistic perspective and a functionality perspective. Like it's awesome. It's very inspiring to me to see that.
Joe, tell me about
so it's just
Arduino. How does that play into the mix? Is that a software and hardware that's specific?
Yes. So Arduino as a platform was another thing around that time, like 2005 is when it started really getting big. That basically is an Atmel microcontroller running Arduino code. And then it was on a little development board, and that was created by, I think, by some professors in Italy that needed it for a class that they were teaching. An easy way to write code. So they had a nice development environment at the time. Engineering tools, the development environments for engineering tools, even today, like they're designed for engineers, and they're usually ridiculously complicated, buggy, and not intended for like a user. So Arduino kind of simplified everything just at the exact right time. And so they had, code running on their chip that would kind of be, I think, like an interpreter, or I don't know if the Arduino IDE now actually compiles the code and loads it in. I haven't fully studied the underlying things. So don't quote me on any of it. But I mean, that was a huge, people use that as a stepping stone to build projects. And some people continue to use that. And some people used that as the first step. And now they went onto other bare metal things or other projects. I didn't actually end up using an Arduino for any actual product until the Defcon China badge, which was just like 2019. I'd use it for building demos to demonstrate other things I'd built, but not as its own standalone thing. And it used to be like you'd go to Hackaday and everybody would just make fun of anybody using an Arduino. But in reality, it's like that's what kept this industry growing, is that tool, and people writing modules to control other things that you can then use. And, as far as open source, it's like, oh, I need to control some NeoPixel LEDs. So Adafruit had, an Arduino library that they wrote. So you can just kind of plug stuff in and get stuff working. And like that's what bridged that gap between needing to be like an actual engineer and anybody else that just wants to.
I've seen
stuff.
Doing a podcast for 16 years. There's an Arduino project to do tally lights on your cameras. I always thought that was cool. We never, when they implemented it, but I was like, hey, this is an option. I'm like, that's kind of neat.
It's really cool. And now, we see more complex stuff coming with like Raspberry Pi, of course, Raspberry Pi, or Raspberry Pi Pico is a cool one. I actually have, it's all wired up. You can't see it, but right next to me on my desk, I'm working on a project that's using a Raspberry Pi Zero 2W. And I actually just tweeted a picture yesterday. It's a top secret project, and I just sent a picture of it. And that's also going to be an artistic circuit board type of project that will come out later in the year, just as a fun video and a fun project. But that device also is sort of Arduino on steroids, which people are going to say, it's not like Arduino at all. And it's totally not. But as far as like building
the difference between a Pico and a Zero and the regular Raspberry Pi, what are those Is the Pico a microcontroller based, or does it run an operating system? It is. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So the Pico is a Raspberry Pi based microcontroller. It's an RP 2030, I think it is. And so the Pico is like a little tiny board with the chip on it. And I know it can run MicroPython, and I don't know if it has an operating system or if that's bare metal. But the original Raspberry Pis, all of them are Linux based, and there's all their operating systems you can load also. And then the Raspberry Pi Zero is kind of the Raspberry Pi without a lot of the extra peripheral set connectors and things so it's like a pared down version of it. Of course, with every iteration of it is just getting more and more powerful.
They're amazing now, right? The power they pack in this, yeah. If you can get one, yeah. What happened to the supply chain? Is that China basically?
It's everything. I think it's like, it's a complicated issue, but yeah, it's distributors that stopped, or it's manufacturers that stopped manufacturing and then started manufacturing, and then everybody started to kind of the toilet paper problem of over purchasing. And then the big companies get priority, so the small companies don't. But the Raspberry Pi definitely has a shortage, and people are marking them up on eBay, and that's how I've been buying them. For the because these are just small one-off, two-off projects that I'm doing. So you buy a couple, yeah, and it's not a huge deal if there's a markup. But if you're doing production, you kind of can't. But yeah, so $15. So the Raspberry Pi Foundation, like Arduino, that was created as a way to have a good development environment for education of learning about, in this case, it's running Linux instead of a more simple kind of bare metal thing. But between Arduino and Raspberry Pi, it's what kept this going and enabled people to do so many cool projects. And so I'm still learning, like, this is my first Raspberry Pi project. I'm totally late to the game with stuff like this. But it's like, I get to learn, there's some hardware interfacing stuff. But then I'm learning about a lot more about Python than I wanted to. But I just wrote like a plugin for an existing piece of software on the Raspberry Pi. And I'd never written a plugin. So it's kind of cool to do some things that I'd never done before, and still try to make it battery powered. And
because when you're on bare metal, you have to write all the code that interfaces with the peripherals because there's no device driver, because there's no kernel.
Usually. So sometimes, and for most of the stuff I've done is all writing the device drivers by hand, but a lot of development environments for microcontrollers nowadays will have sort of a device level kind of stack. Even to this day, you could, or even like some environments, it's like, I need to engage the UART interface. So you basically click on what speed do you want to set it up? What do you want for these things? GUI based, and it will generate some code, which is useful. And I did that for the Defcon 27 badge because that was so much more complicated. But anytime you abstract stuff makes debugging way harder, I think. So it's like when I'm dealing with the Raspberry Pi, you have so many layers of things that if any of those go wrong, it might be my user code, it might be the code underneath, it might be the operating system, it might be the drivers, it might be so it could be all these things where if it's bare metal and the pin doesn't go high, you can go through your code and figure out why is that happening. You can look at the registers and say, oh, the output port isn't set. So it's just depending on how you want to design a product and how you want to create your product, there are benefits, advantages and disadvantages.
It's almost just getting started out, the hardware hacking. Joe, what recommendations do you have for it?
So I would say there's a great book that just came out. Colin O'Flynn and Jasper Van Woudenberg wrote a book called The Hardware
Hacking Handbook. I think it's the wrote the forward for it. Yeah, I just happen to have your website up. And yeah, you have both of it. Yeah.
Hardware Hacking Handbook. I didn't want to say the wrong series of things, but yeah, the Hardware Hacking Handbook. It's a little advanced, but it gets in at the beginning as far as like what tools you can use and getting started with those. But what I really like about it is it goes into some amazing attacks, fault injection, and things like side channel power analysis that are definitely advanced things, but you can follow along with them, right? So you can buy that book, you can read some of the early chapters. I also always recommend people to go to the Exploiteers website. And those are some guys that have given some talks at Defcon. I don't know if they're still active, but it's exploitee.rs. because they have a lot of different attacks on consumer electronic devices. So you can kind of follow along with what they've done. And a lot of them are fairly simple as far as like UART interface access to a console that you can then do some software tricks to get root access, or maybe like a JTAG interface to do something. And then also, like, I also tell people, like, if you go to infocon.org, which is Jeff Moss's site where he's trying to archive every conference, hacker conference video presentation. There are a lot of good hardware talks that have been given that probably it will just be lost to time if they weren't preserved. And just, watch some old talks and replicate that work and build on that. But it really is just all about
I think it provides a great foundation to understanding hardware operating systems regardless of the platform, right? If you can understand it that I like the smaller embedded devices and controllers because I can wrap my brain around everything it's doing, right? Because it's small, very purpose built.
Right.
So when you get into bigger enterprise hardware and operating systems, I think it's a good foundation.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, really, if you think about it, everything nowadays has at least one microcontroller in it. Anytime somebody gives a talk about hacking a piece of hardware, whether it's a small device or it's a car or it's industrial, SCADA equipment or whatever, right? Any sort of junk hacking you want to call it, sensational, this, that, whatever, it's all hardware. It's all microcontrollers, and like all of the techniques for hardware hacking apply to this entire range of things. That's what's so cool. Car hacking, you're sniffing CAN bus. Instead of, if you're doing it on a circuit board, maybe you'd be sniffing USB or I2C or SPI. So these concepts apply everywhere. And that's what's so cool is if you're into hardware, you can decide to focus on small things. You can decide to focus on big things, but it's like so many of the same tools and the same mindset for all of it.
You're right. It is the mindset of what can I make it do it's not supposed to do. Right.
Exactly.
That's awesome. So, what did you when you like kind of pseudo retired from doing Defcon badges?
Yeah, so that was Defcon 17. So I stopped doing that, and I think that was around the time when doing my trainings ended up taking more time. And I know my kids also were young. Prototype This was done, so I was filming that at the same time as some of the early Defcon badges too. I think I just wanted to slow down a little bit and just work on some of my own stuff. I was actually doing some engineering consulting, which I've never really been a fan of consulting. And I think it's not the fact that I don't like consulting, but it's usually that I end up having to work with people that I don't like. Like if you're consulting for a customer, if you don't get along with the customer, then it makes everything miserable. So I was very hesitant about who I was working with, but I was doing some consulting, engineering, production engineering, design work. Actually, one of those projects is one of the clients of this project I stayed in touch with over the years, and we're working on some other stuff now, which is funny, like 10 years later. But yeah, I was just doing baby raising and doing some engineering work and then doing trainings. For the first couple of years of hardware hacking training was just at Black Hat. I would just do it there exclusively. But then over time, private training started becoming a thing. And somebody would take a class at Black Hat and say, hey, can you come and do it for my organization? And I was kind of like, it's going to be such a pain. I got to drag all my crap there and this and that. But then with some prodding from some of my friends that were in the hacker community, I decided to do some private training. So that ended up being for the next couple of years. I was kind of doing trainings every month or every other month or so, and then just working on other stuff in the meantime, and just kind of getting back to just doing things that I enjoyed without a pressure on me of having to get them done necessarily.
What's the student or organization's motivation in getting hardware hacking training, right? Because it's not, I find, especially the space that I work in now, getting people's attention to the security ramifications of firmware in hardware at this level is challenging. So I'm excited that you've got an audience of people that want to learn hardware hack. How do they justify that into their organization?
Yeah. I mean, I'm super grateful that I'm able to make a living doing this, right? I mean, like I said, it's the fact that any of us can do what we love to do, right? And be involved in hacking in a way that whether we call it computer security or not, like we're still hackers, right? And we're still doing this stuff. So I'm super grateful. I don't exactly know a lot of the organizations I work with. I kind of have a sense of what they do. But what's really interesting is it's not always engineers that come to the class. Like a lot of times, because hardware is so integral, like we have hardware devices everywhere, right? Like I think the general consensus for a lot of these organizations is like, everybody needs to learn a little bit of programming. Everybody needs to learn a little bit about how electronics work, how hackers could do things, how adversaries could do things. And I've taught classes that are like biologists or chemists or just non-technical people, management. Some management's technical, but not always. And then sometimes it's been with engineers who are designing products who just, are focused on engineering. And I know what engineers focus on. And it's not security a lot of times. It's like trying to get the thing to work and then trying to get it manufactured, right? And like make sure your yields are good and everything is manufacturing, that you make manufacturing's job easier and all of these things. Get it in, under budget and on time and all these things. So security is really hard to integrate, and engineers, a lot of them are not trained in security anyway. So teaching classes with engineers is fun because they realize that the stuff that they're doing to make their jobs easier is stuff that we're using to exploit. And they go, I didn't even think that somebody would look at those
making
things.
People have those aha moments is very, very rewarding, right? Oh, I was building this stuff. I didn't realize someone would actually think to do that.
Yeah. I didn't know someone would open that up and actually like use the logic analyzer to sniff communication, even though it's the same tool that they're using to sniff communication for debugging. So those are the really satisfying ones. But I think it mostly is like companies just want their people to understand a little bit about everything. And I do have some more advanced classes that I'll do for certain groups if they want it. But those are much more niche, where it's like that. I don't do those as often as I just do my basic.
Like U.S. government,
which is also
various organizations being interested in that as well.
It depends.
Like using it this as an adversary, I'm sure, is a niche in and of itself, right? And we've heard stories from the past. Like my favorite one is the Russians built a listening device in the typewriters. Ever see that story? Yeah.
Oh yeah. Sure. Yeah. That's I can't remember what the name.
I can't remember the detail. I didn't have the article flagged.
That's a classic hardware implant, right? So like I have one class I talk about hardware espionage and hardware implants, and of course I mentioned like the Bloomberg super micro story and realities of doing hardware implants versus why would you want to burn a hardware exploit or hardware implant if you can do it in firmware or software? Get somebody to click on a link. Like there's so many other ways to get access to system. But yeah, like that the Soviet era typewriter hardware implant was like one of the first. There were some others before that too, just amazing engineering. And it really, when I see stuff like that, or like when the NSA like Ant catalog came out a couple years ago, it's like, man, there's some advanced stuff going on that we don't even know about. That was part of was that the Snowden, part of the Snowden leaks? So it basically was like a catalog of hardware implants and services that you could buy from our government agencies. And it's like, oh, I need to have some sort of, device that's going to sit and lie in wait until something happens and then do, whatever. And there was even a picture of like some guys I don't remember if it was the NSA or something, of taking a device and modifying like the router. So they took a box that was en route from Cisco to the customer. They intercepted it, modified it in some way, put it all back together, and then shipped it on its way. And so there was a catalog that like government agencies could be like, I need this to spy on this company or country or person or whatever. And then what ended up coming out of that was a website called the NSA Playset, which was started by Joe Fitzpatrick, maybe a couple other guys here in Portland, that was hobby-based versions of those things. Of like, you don't need to spend $20,000 on a keyboard monitoring device. Like you can build one with a tiny little chip for this amount and kind of open source versions of it. But to see that type of stuff that companies are or companies or government agencies are building is up here. Like it's really complicated stuff. So when that came out, I was like, man, what are we doing talking about these things over and over again that still haven't been fixed? And the government's like doing all this crazy stuff. So there still, I think, is like a lot that we can learn and that we can kind of use to get to that. Like there's a lot of growing room.
I see a lot of articles recently, and they're very flowery and fluffy, I'll call them, about how to detect if your hotel room is bugged or something like that, right? And I think the majority of the ones that are like hitting the mainstream kind of news outlets, if you will, are like, oh, just like go on your phone and get a Wi-Fi, app, and it shows you like the Wi-Fi devices kind of thing. And I'm like,
right, or like use your light, your camera light, or your phone light to look for reflections of cameras and stuff.
But I gotta imagine there's way more advanced ways to find it. And like, what's the probability your ultra room's going to be bugged today? I'm not sure.
Right, if you're being targeted, I mean, it's unlikely unless you're being targeted. There are some more advanced ways, like there's a lot of bug finding techniques that the government has, and there's some sort of like I can't remember what it's called. I think it's a linear junction detector that can detect certain things about semiconductors. A lot of software-defined radio stuff, you could do spectrum analysis and things. But there, if somebody wants to hide well, they can. I think a lot of these articles are more of like, if you're at an Airbnb and the owner is spying on you, if they're just going to buy something off the shelf from Amazon.
Right, it's going to have a Wi-Fi signature or something on it,
Yeah. But I assume that somebody's always watching. And it's like, and I figure if something gets released of me, then fine, everyone gets to see it. Like I figure like, you can do your part to try to prevent that. Especially with, using encryption and using Tor and using all these other things. People say, well, Tor is not great either, but it's better than other things using VPN, all these things. But at some point, if somebody wants to get your information or release it or spy on you or set up a bug or a camera, like they will, right? And it's like undoubtedly will be released. And it's kind of how it is.
You mentioned before side channel attacks. There's been some interesting kind of side channel attacks against hardware recently. One was with the power. Right. They could detect, they broke encryption basically through a side channel attack that was detecting power fluctuations. This is probably within your world, right?
Yeah. So side channel power analysis, that's been done since probably at least in practice since like the mid 90s, I think, is when it started getting well known through like cryptography research. Paul Kocher and his team had kind of built this foundation of work around that of monitoring power consumption to determine like when an encryption operation is happening and like to extract crypto keys that way. But it was still very math heavy, really complicated. And then over time, Colin O'Flynn being one of the people have created tools to make these really complex tasks easier. And that's why I mentioned his book, because you can kind of follow along and do these things. And so because power analysis, side channels are basically any, a device unintentionally leaking information. So the device itself doesn't know that it's leaking something that you could take advantage of, as opposed to a covert channel, which would more be hardware implant type of thing where a device is intentionally exfiltrating information. So the side channels, because there's tools out there and a lot of open source stuff and a lot of research, a lot of resources, people are able to do that easier and easier on lots of different platforms. And there was a talk at hardware.io that was probably maybe the one you were thinking of. That was a side channel attack, power analysis attack, but also they were analyzing essentially audio side channels of like inductors.
I'm always fascinated in this research, Joe, because we covered the show for the past 16 years, and there's usually quite a few per year at least. They're like, if you can control a fan speed, which you can in most modern PCs, that can be used as a side channel attack. Right. And then there's LEDs, like you can control the LED. I was explaining this to our intern, right, of how the firmware controls all of the hardware, including all of the LEDs, and it's programmable on things like a W254G router, and like that's how you get telemetry back.
Right. I've done one as a demo, but those are covert. Those are going to be intentional exfiltration.
Correct.
For any device that is doing encryption, like that's more resource intensive than being idle or whatever other things. So you can basically capture a bunch of power traces as a system is doing its thing. And if you're able to control part of that to change the key so you know what bits are coming in and stuff, or to change your text going in or whatever, you can measure power consumption and pull out things. Like it's still really complicated, but it's become easier. And the thing at hardware.io, they were building upon some previous research of not only does power increase, when power increases, the power supply components on the board will react. And inductors, which are used as part of a power supply, will generate some high frequency noise that can be picked up by special antennas. So you can now use special microphone. So you can now use a microphone to listen to a computer doing an encryption operation and then pull out keys and all sorts of stuff. So, I mean, it's a fascinating world, but I wouldn't suggest like doing that as your first hardware hacking thing, because it will be very discouraging very quickly if you start at that, right? So starting with like some earlier base level stuff to get there is probably the way to go.
And not something,
but it really
like how concerned do we need to be about this for organizations today? Probably not very concerned, right?
Well, I was going to say, like, anything that doesn't have a mitigation for side channels, and it's not just power analysis, it's timing. So we've seen timing side channels in software, and in web-based stuff, you can do that in hardware also. If there are not intentional mitigations put in, then the device will probably be vulnerable. So depending on what devices are in your organization and if they're going to be targeted in some way, it could be a problem. It depends on
I like your take of, if there are no mitigations, that's the thing you should probably focus on as a threat.
As a threat.
Because mitigation might not be possible without new hardware, correct? Potentially.
Yes, potentially. But also, like, the fact that these attacks are now known to be exploited more often, engineers, again, they're not trained in that world at all. But at least somebody in the organization should say, hey, I heard about these side channel things. Can we try to prevent these things? The other problem, though, and sometimes you could do that in firmware. There could be some firmware trick. If it's, say, an FPGA, you could maybe reconfigure the FPGA. If it's hardware-based, like if there's a physical hardware problem, that's a challenge because you got to respin everything, which is not going to happen in most cases, as we know, like we see old devices. But the, what was the other thing? I can't remember. There was one. Oh, yeah, right. So the other problem is the mitigations. A lot of times, the ones that actually work are patented. So you have to pay licensing fees to mitigate the problem.
Yeah, because I would think if it's emitting sound, the mitigation, then we just know like basic physics, right? You probably could have a device that would either detect or prevent audio covert channels. Is that where you get into patents, right?
But if it's the component generating that based on power consumption, it's basically like modulating power consumption in a system, or, you know, for, say, timing attacks, it's having everything take the same amount of time. Or if it's fault injection, it's making things not susceptible to voltage glitches or to EM. So those techniques are the things that are patented. It doesn't mean that, I mean...
They impact performance, though. Correct. They impact performance in your description, potentially,
but maybe not to the point that matters. And that's the thing, is a lot of times, especially, so take a timing attack, for example. That's something where with embedded systems and computer systems also usually, but like embedded systems, the regular ANSI-C standard library, like memcomp function, is taking the two things you want to compare, and it's comparing one byte at a time. So it checks the first byte. If that one matches, it checks the second byte. If that one matches, it checks the third byte. If that byte doesn't match, the routine exits, because that's more efficient, right? It's optimized, so you're not wasting cycles. But if somebody could measure that weakness and say, oh, it returned early, that's not the correct byte, so I'm going to try the next byte. So the fact that things are optimized or wasting cycles can actually go against what you want to do. Like you might want to waste cycles and make it less efficient to make things more secure. And you might not even notice. In most cases, if something's going to take, even a microsecond longer, in a lot of cases, no one's going to notice unless it's an operation that's happening over and over and over again, like video streaming or something. So there are ways to do it, but the fact that a lot of the known kind of tried and true for sure methods cost money to implement, we all know money and security don't always mix, right? Why would a company spend money on security when they can spend it on marketing?
And the concern there is with manufacturers wanted to take that cheaper route, right? Because they're a for-profit business and they want to manufacture the product for as less cost as they can manage in the IoT space, right? I think that's how we end up with a lot of these products that have no security still to this day.
Right. It's kind of a combination of not understanding the threat or not caring about the threat or not wanting to pay the money to implement it. And I mean, we've seen this in the software side for years. It's like a company gets popped and then they just put out a press release and they're like, sorry, we got hacked. We'll do better. And then that's it. Like maybe they don't even implement new security. Or if they do it after they've been hacked. And I think with hardware, because it's so hard to design electronics anyway, in a production manufacturing sense, everybody takes it for granted. Like this, phones and stuff and game consoles and things are super complex that people are hacking. And it's just everything costs money and everything's hard. And it's always a decision of like, do we pay the money to add that security feature that maybe is going to break something that we haven't anticipated yet? Do we even want to try that, or should we just wait to get hacked if we do and deal with it later? Which is the standard thing we've been saying for, I guess decades now, right? That's kind of how it is.
Do you think regulation would help produce more secure devices, like where it matters? Maybe on the consumer side, where the consumer's going to buy whatever's cheapest, but now everything,
right.
Refrigerator, washing machine, everything's got software and hardware working together to maintain connectivity.
That's a good question. Yeah. I mean, I haven't really thought about that. I think when there's regulation, on one hand, it's like companies should be free to do what they want, but on the other hand, they kind of have a responsibility now, right? It's almost like the full disclosure debate, right? So I'll tangent for a second. Like it used to be, we would contact a company. If they didn't fix the problem, we would just release the exploit, right? We'd release the vulnerability. The whole world would see it and fine. But now it's a much more of there's a moral dilemma because there are so many more systems, so many more things that become vulnerable if you release an exploit, a 0 day, whatever it is. Like, yes, the company is going to try to fix the problem, but now it can be weaponized and used for all these other things. So you have to make this more conscious choice of like when to release stuff. And yeah, so I don't even remember where I was going.
Or I think like the moral dilemma of do I keep it to myself? Do I put it out to the public?
Oh, right.
Do I sell it? Do I sell it to someone? And who do I sell it to? And what are they going to use it for? What's it sell it to?
Right. Yeah, that too. But the original, before I went off on the tangent, there was something I was trying to tie it back to. But I don't remember.
That's fair.
I think I need more caffeine. I'm only halfway through.
So are you doing security research today or more just hardware research? Like what are you working on today?
Okay, so this is kind of an interesting thing. Over the past couple of years, I've been doing trainings and did the badges right before COVID and got sucked back into that because it was, it'd been a while since I designed the badges and I thought it'd be fun to do something again for the community. I got super burned out from doing those badges. It was basically like 90-hour weeks in a cave because I couldn't talk to anybody about it except Jeff and the engineers I was working with at the manufacturing facility. So very lonely for a long time and a lot of work. So after Defcon happened right before COVID, I was like, I don't really know what I want to do. Training, of course, I want to do because it's satisfying, but I was kind of being bummed out about traveling so much and being away from my family. So I didn't really know what to do. And then COVID hit. And it was like, okay, now I'm forced to do whatever I can to survive. But I kind of turned it into an opportunity to do some things that I had wanted to do, but never could do because I was always out and about and traveling, growing my hair being one of them. I had to get through like the awkward kind of, Jufro stage of hair.
My son went through that. There's an awkward, I remember the barber said, there's an awkward stage there.
Yes. And it required being forced to stay home is the only way to get through it. But yeah, so like I took up meditation, which I'd always wanted to get into just to kind of help me settle my mind a little bit. And I decided, like, I'm just going to work on things, which has always kind of been my thing, but I've always had underlying of like, I need to support my family. I need to do this. I need to do that. Of like, I want to work on projects that are fun and satisfying. If they make money, great. But I want to make sure that my brain stays sharp and that I stay motivated. So I shouldn't feel bad if I work on a project that is not for money. So I started just kind of tinkering around with my own stuff. And my wife had always said that too, of like, you don't always have to make a product or do this or do that. Like, just do what you love to do. I kind of lost that because I put that pressure on myself of like, we have to
get a badge out. Right. Yeah.
Or got to buy food and have to, before buy diapers. So not having that pressure really kind of made me fall back in love with building stuff. So I just started kind of tinkering with things on my own. Nothing big, nothing I released or anything. And, started doing some trainings again when COVID kind of started to lift a little bit. But I got this email out of the blue from a guy that was like, hey, I'm locked out of my hardware wallet. Can you help me hack it?
I'm glad you told the story. Yeah, I almost forgot to ask about the story.
Yeah, and this was one where, again, I was at home. I'd also broken my foot during COVID. So for, I think it was 18 months, it was a huge amount of time of lockdown.
Were you skateboarding and broke your foot?
No, I was running. Running is the most dangerous sport. I've broken both of my feet running, by tripping on things, by not paying attention. But so I was also, in a chair for a long time. But I was just kind of hanging out and got this email, and it sounded kind of interesting because I was looking for something to do. And at that point, so this particular hardware wallet was a Trezor One, which there had been some work already about hacking that device from a couple different people. So I was like, okay, this is cool. Like, I wasn't really paying attention to cryptocurrency, wasn't paying attention really to hardware wallets. Like, I'd seen the talks in person, but it didn't apply to me at the time. I just thought they were cool attacks because it was false injection and some other stuff. And I was like, okay, I could try to replicate some of that work and help this guy out, and it would be cool. Like, I have an excuse to really learn fault injection and all of these things.
What is fault injection, Joe?
So fault injection is another one of these advanced techniques, kind of like side channel power analysis, where you're basically causing a device to misbehave in some way at an exact point in time that's going to benefit you. So if you think about, like, it's kind of like a brown, like, you flip off the lights really fast. We're doing that on a microcontroller on the core voltage usually, where if we know exactly where, say, a compare routine is happening, is there security enabled, yes or no? If you can inject a fault at just the right time by causing a power spike, by grounding power line really fast. There's other ways you can do it as well through electromagnetic interference and other things. But you basically try to confuse like the internal logic to either skip over the check or return a different value or change your program flow. And you're basically just doing it in a somewhat controlled manner. Like, you don't always know what's going to happen, but there's a lot of work now into really characterizing how to do certain things. So it's just, I'd always wanted to learn about it, but never really had a reason. And to me, like, having the reason was the motivating factor to do it. And Colin O'Flynn, who had created a lot of this hardware to let you do fault injection more easily, is a friend of mine. And like, he just sent me a bunch of stuff to use to try out. And that was like, so I'm also a big fan of like using tools that exist to do the job. Where I know a lot of people that come into hardware from a software side are like, I'll just write some script to do that, or I'll just write some code to do it. And it's like, don't bother, like, just use the tools that are already existing. So I'm a huge fan of that. And to be able to use Colin's tools instead of like trying to create my own tool to do it, which I could, but what's the point? Like, the work is already done. And now I can kind of build on that. So I figured like the Trezor One was vulnerable to a fault injection attack that my friends had done before, and some other people I knew had done, and some other people I didn't know had done, and publicized some of it. Not all of the details, but enough to let somebody with enough skill kind of, build that out. So I engaged with this guy and ultimately hacked his device. During that process, though, my wife had come in. And
did you have another device to practice on before you went to his? Okay.
Oh yeah, right. So of course, I mean, I bought a bunch of exact devices, loaded them with the same version of firmware, which is what you would want to do in any sort of hardware hacking process.
Breaking things is totally a thing. We didn't talk about creating bricks. I'm sure you created a lot of bricks in your
for sure. And so if you're doing the project and you can get multiple devices, that's great. If you can't, that kind of changes your approach. But in this case, I bought a bunch, tested on those, and once I could prove it to the guy, to Dan, he flew from New Jersey to Portland, and we did the attack, which I'll talk about in a second. But while I was doing all this work, my wife came in to my office, and she's like, "You should be filming this," because a lot of the videos that I make, they're all bad usually. It's like me with my phone, and it's like, "Hey, here's a thing I want to show you." And a lot of the good videos have been like engineering focused, building focused, right? So prototype this. I had just done a video for Wired, which was called the Pizza Compass. So if you search on YouTube, actually, if you go to my website, you'll see it too. But if you search for YouTube, I think like engineer pizza or something, like they didn't put my name in the title, so it might be harder to find. But I built a pizza compass during COVID to basically, like, it's a hardware device that looks like a compass and it's nice, artistic. And you press a button and it has GPS and it tells you where the nearest pizza place is. Like, you just follow the lights of the compass to the. So I'd done that, and again, a lot of my stuff is engineering focused, and my hacker videos, I don't make that many, and the ones I do are very just engineer hacker focused, like to other engineers and other hackers. She was like, "You should film this in a better produced way to show people like that you're a hacker still," And so I ended up talking to a friend of mine, which was my old client of doing this consulting project, who's a filmmaker. And I was like, "Hey, do you want to film this? Like, should we try to film the process? Like, when Dan comes here to do the real attack, should we film it?" He's like, "Hell yeah, let's do it." So we arranged to have the cameraman who had filmed my Wired work, is a local cameraman, now a friend of mine. We hired him for the day, actually a couple days, to set up and everything. And once I could prove that the attack was working and everything, and we got the camera guy, got the client, got Dan to fly here, and we filmed the whole thing in a professional way. But we filmed it just like all my other videos. I want to show like with prototype this, I want to show the engineering process. This video, I wanted to show the hacker process. So everything in there is real. Nothing's faked. I know there's comments online, like I don't read the comments, but people have told me like they think we faked the end result because we were like smiling beforehand. No, I mean, people make up all sorts of stuff, but we filmed it in real time and did the attack. And you'll have to watch the video to see the whole thing. But there ended up being a couple $1 million on it, and that was like just a really exciting process for me to learn and kind of get me excited again about stuff. But then realized like, oh, and my friend who filmed it was like, and Dan also, the guy who hacked his wallet, he's like, there's probably a business to help other people who have lost their cryptocurrency. Like, yeah, you're probably right. And then I thought about it of like, I could maybe like use my skills to help people in a direct way, right? Like training is something where I'm helping people in a way that I may never see, but it's still really satisfying because I know that they're learning something. Maybe they never even use it, but they now think about things a little bit differently. So I love that aspect. But with the wallet hacking, it can really like change somebody's life using a skill that I already have. And that's another really satisfying
Obviously,
thing.
There's a vetting process that would need to happen in this business model as well. Making sure that they actually own the wallet.
Yeah. So when we decided to do this, we kind of started this side business called opspec.io, which is me and my partner, Fred, who was my old client, and Dan, who was the customer who hacked his wallet, and said, hey, let's just throw up like a really bad temporary website, which is still temporary, like letting people know that we can try to hack your device or do password cracking or whatever it is. And just to try to see if there's a need for that. And when that video came out, which was in, I think, January, which now has like over 5 million views, we've gotten hundreds and hundreds of emails and tons. And a lot of people have been scammed, which we're not going to help with. Like 90% of them probably have been scammed. But then there's some that actually have devices that they've been locked out of that I know I can do. So we picked ones that we know we could do relatively easily. And then there's some longer term projects of devices that haven't been hacked before, but we think could be hacked. And it's just kind of fun to use different techniques for different things because not everybody has the same problem. So it's been kind of fun in that way. And then also to not just do the work myself, right? Because there's certain things that I'm good at and I know what I'm good at, but there's other people out there in this community that are really good at other things, right? So it's like, this is not something where we just want to do it all on our own. But if we need chip hacking, we're going to go to the best chip hackers in the world and hopefully be able to film some of that stuff too. Or go to like some password cracking people, like Password Cracking Village and stuff. There's so many great people doing that type of work. And there's just so much to show in the hacker world. So I'm hoping that maybe more will grow out of that project instead of just hacking wallets, but more showing the kind of the hacker community as a whole and helping people in other ways. But I don't really know. It's like, who knows? If it stops tomorrow, I'm still fine and happy doing everything else.
It's kind of like lockpicking
really
in a way too. We learn these skills going to conferences all these years, and we help people out. Like, I'm locked out of that. Like, can you help me? Like, I always carry a set of lockpicks with me wherever I go. I'm not the world. I am by far not the world's greatest lockpicker, right? But like, oftentimes I can help, mostly raking. I can help people, but
Sure. I mean, it's like, I'm not the world's best hardware hacker either, right? And it's like, there's always people doing amazing other stuff, but it's like, if you can use the skills that you have in a way to help somebody, like, that's pretty cool. And there was one that I did that was a hardware wallet that had a broken button. So the device itself was physically secure, like it's a really well done device, but the button was broken. So the guy couldn't enter his PIN to any of his transactions. Super simple. It was like, a 20-minute reverse engineering process to figure out which button was failing and how the button was wired up on the board. And I added in like this giant external button and got in touch with him on Zoom. And like, he told me his PIN and I sent him the money just by the simple, I wouldn't even call it a hardware hack, right? A simple modification. So those are the kinds of stories that are fun. And we actually have another video coming out tomorrow, I don't know if this video comes out today, but our new video comes out tomorrow. That's another experience of hacking a device. Just again, to show cool to show hacking techniques, but tell a cool story and do it in a way that hasn't traditionally been shown in, like, technical stuff usually isn't shown in a thematic, theatrical way, right? Like, usually very, very kind of in a certain way. So I feel like what we're doing with these videos, using my partner Fred and his son Freddie, who just finished film school, who's like this wonderkind of a storyteller, it's almost like we're doing what we did with the badges in a way of like trying to do something a little bit different to excite people. And really, to me, having been making videos and stuff, it's less about the wallet hacking and more about telling cool stories in like a very interesting, compelling way to reach an audience outside of our bubble too. Because if we're already in the bubble, we already are kind of into this stuff. But if we can reach the outside bubble, outside of our bubble, we can get more people into this community to hopefully do more cool things, right? So it's trying to break out of that bubble by having videos that people are like, ooh, that's cool, that somebody would watch who maybe is curious about electronics or hacking or something, but hasn't quite done it. Or somebody maybe that doesn't even know that they can do it.
Cryptocurrency too is a great lead into that, as we find a lot of the youth of today, right? When they get into computers and hacking, they're always like, oh, cryptocurrency, like, what's that? I want to get into that.
Yeah, it's definitely a hot topic right now. I'm no way a representative of cryptocurrency, and I have basically zero opinion on any of it. But I like that I can hack on stuff and just hack things and help people. But it's one of those projects that I'm always doing lots of things, and it has to continue to interest me and keep me motivated. And for right now, training is. I'm doing this other project that is going to be a super funny video, but another really kind of fun project. And like, that's the thing, is just always being independent, always trying to find something that's exciting that can kind of move me forward.
Joe, I was going to ask you what your favorite hacker movie is, but I'm assuming by your T-shirt that I think I know the answer to that already. Is your T-shirt representative of your favorite hacker movies? If you listen to audio, it's T-shirts as war games.
That's why I wore it. Yeah, so I have my War Games shirt on today. I wear this one a lot, and I do it because it's my favorite movie, but also because a lot of hackers don't even know that the movie existed. They think of Hackers as the first movie, or maybe even Swordfish or something later.
I like Hackers is my favorite, but War Games is a special place in my heart because when you and I were 7 years old, we're roughly the same age, 30. We're roughly 30 something, right?
Yeah.
But that movie had come out like when we were hacking on our early computers when we were 7, 8 years old.
Yeah, and right. So War Games came out in 83, and I didn't even see it until probably I was 14, 15, maybe. So I didn't even know that it was out until later. But I just love the story. Like, yeah, some of it's cheesy, but I just love it. I love it, and I love Sneakers also, which kind of is like, it's not really what The Loft was like, but it was like what The Loft wanted to be. And it was at the same era, right? So 92 when Sneakers came out, which was made by the same, or written by the same people that wrote War Games. And that one, I just love all the different characters and some of the hacking stuff that they were doing. Again, like some of it's over the top, but whatever, still cool. Hackers was a great representation of like the 90s hackers.
I love the style of that film, the music, the costumes, the set design was just so cool, right? That's what one of the things that gets me, right?
So in like a cheesy way, like it's such.
Well,
it's such
I
a
think
good
the
movie.
directors had the taken a hold of the cheesiness. It really embraced it because they had the Masters of Deception guys as the consultants for the film. They were telling you like what hacking actually really looked, and some of the names are similar from them. So the Masters of Deception, and creatively the director side, they go on, as we know from watching the film, a totally different direction. What hacking inside the street.
But it's definitely like I had my kids watch War Games a couple years ago just so they can kind of see why I'm so excited. Like I still like it's I think it's a good representation kind of like cool things. So they watched that, and they haven't watched Sneakers yet, but I think they're probably old enough now to watch Sneakers. And I think Hackers too, like those are things like if somebody's getting into the scene, right? It's like, or they're curious, it's like watch War Games and Hackers and Sneakers and see if any of those resonate with you.
It's awesome. Well, Joe, it was great having you on Hacker Heroes. Best of luck with your training and your hacker relief effort for those crypto wallets. I think that's great.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. I love the name Hacker. I don't feel like I deserve to be on a show that says Heroes, but Hacker, yes. So yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for everybody who's listening, and you can, I guess, feel free to follow my minimally updated Twitter feed at Joe Grand and my website grandideastudio.com. And yeah, stay tuned for more videos and projects. And yeah, YouTube is Joe Grand. Find that too. I'm hoping that to do more of that stuff. It's just so fun to produce videos like that is just a lot of fun. So hopefully there's more stuff coming. Stay tuned. And yeah, thanks again for having me. That was fun.
Thanks so much, Joe.